Welcome to this interview for the Artaria Chamber Music School. I'm Ray Show's director and founder of the Artaria String Quartet and also the school, and you are now a new member to the Dali String Quartet in full professional mode, and we're going to hear a little bit about that in just a minute, but I have a few questions to ask first about the younger Ari that was part of the Artaria Chamber Music School back when it was formed way back in the early 2000s, and what your experience was. If you could share some of the tidbits and maybe anecdotes and things that you picked up. I know it's been a while. I mean, this has been 20 years for you, and but I want to introduce the school to people that not only have been part of the program, but have developed their craft and have continued with it and gone on, and why did they do it? So here's a lead into some of my questions. First of all, question number one. So Ari, how did you get involved with chamber music, and at what age?
Yeah, thanks, Ray, and thanks for having me. It's so great. I remember really fondly a bunch of the performances that I saw you guys give when I was studying back in Minnesota, and I flew through Minneapolis this morning, so I'm like, it's on my mind for more than one reason. But anyway, yeah, my first experiences with chamber music, I was studying with Mary West, who probably is like, I mean, she's maybe not as much part of the conversation right now, but when I was a student, she was born in 1909, and for any of the violinists, maybe violinists, and like hopefully some cellists who are studying any Sevchik, if you know any of those books, Mary studied with Sevchik, which is like pretty wild. So Mary was fantastic. She also studied with Misha Mishakov, who had been concertmaster of the NBC Symphony under Toscanini, and she studied with Louis Persinger, one of Menuhin's teachers. So she had this like fantastic background from like high school of violin playing in the first half of the 19th century. She remembered when Ruggiero Ricci was a boy, and if you haven't listened to Ruggiero Ricci, go listen to some of those Paganini Caprice recordings. He was one of the first violinists to perform all 24 in recital, I think. And she remembered him when he was a kid. So anyway, Mary was teaching at Madeline Island Music Camp. And so chamber music was something that was really, I think, big for a lot of her students. And even before I went there, she recommended that I go check out Augsburg School for Strings. There was a summer camp at Augsburg College that I think Paul Owsley was directing. And I think Elizabeth Erickson and Stella Anderson were teaching there. And yeah, so those were some of my earlier kind of experiences with it. And even before that, Mary suggested, Tom Rosenberg is running some quartet stuff. So when I was like 12 years old for the first time, when Tom was still living in St. Paul in an apartment before he moved into his house, I remember going there and working on Haydn Opus 20 number 5 and Mozart Kurschel 464, and just feeling very confused and like totally overwhelmed, and just like, feeling like I sounded really bad and I couldn't figure it out. And fast forward a few more years, and I, seeing friends of mine. I was studying at Madeline Island Music Camp one summer, and I got to hear some really wonderful players, who are not from the Twin Cities, after hearing all these great players from the Twin Cities too. And playing fantastic chamber music, and the faculty there, the Brentano String Quartet was fairly early on. If anybody doesn't know that quartet, go listen, they're amazing. I later went on and studied with Mark for a few years, but at that point, Nina Lee is the cellist now, and she had just joined. So that was like around 2000 or so. And I remember seeing them and hearing them play Bartok First Quartet and Mendelssohn Opus 12 and some pieces by Stephen Mackey, including String Theory. And Norman Carroll, who was the concertmaster of the Philadelphia Orchestra for many years, was there as a faculty member, and they played the Tchaikovsky Souvenir de Florence. And I was just hearing all this stuff, and I totally flipped out. And, and then fast forward, coming back home out of the summertime and getting back into quartets. I had a dear friend named Dee Lee who was playing in quartets and studying with Tom in that program, and all the kids from NYS that were also doing that. And I remember then going to hear your quartet. I remember an 18-4 performance from a million years ago. I can't remember if it was at McAllister, maybe, but and I just remember totally falling in love with the way that you guys were sculpting sounds together, and what a quartet sounded and felt like. And I really, I caught the bug. and
Well,
and
now,
getting to hear you
didn't
guys.
you play both violin and viola for a couple of those years? Tell us about how that worked.
Yeah. So I mean, I was just loving it. I had this quartet with a violinist named Bridget McCarthy, and
Oh, Bridget, that's right. I remember Bridget.
yep, and Rachel Ryan and Rachel Kuipers as well.
Right.
And this was this fantastic group, and we were playing like Debussy quartet. And then the next year, Bridget had graduated, and I was in my last year of high school, and then the same three of us were playing, and Gina and Marie Beisler ended up joining. And I mean, joining, like we were a group now with Gina Ann as well. And Tom, I remember saying to me that a couple of other students, I think it was also with Rachel Ryan on cello, but Annie Rossi and Joe Kinnear were the other two. And he was like, I just need a violist for this group. Like, have you ever played viola? Do you like have any interest in that? I was like, that sounds fun. And I just was such a like quartet head that I was like, it would be so fun to just get to see what the quartet is like from all these different perspectives. Because I was like, I had felt like a little insecure, and like I work a lot to kind of dispel this idea that like that I people told me all the time, it's not a hierarchy. It's not the first violinist the better violinist, the second violinist the better violinist. No, they're different roles, and both need to be virtuosos and really understand what they're doing in that role. And I was, but I was feeling a little insecure and like really not really sure what I could do if I was like good enough to play first violin. Those parts are hard, and like thinking about it that way a little bit. But I was like, okay, cool. Well, I've gotten to play a lot of second violin, and now in this other quartet, I'm going to play some first violin, and it'd be fun to play viola too. And
No
that was great.
cello? You didn't do cello either.
Not yet. And just
Right.
like getting to see it from all these different perspectives was really fun. And I just wanted to like learn more about it because I was just so enthralled with like this blended quartet sound. And the more time that I got to spend playing quartets was just, I knew that was like what I really hoped that I might get to do in my life. Sure.
So how did you land your recent position with Dali Quartet, and why did it take you so long to get to a quartet?
Okay. So that's pretty funny. Yeah. So well, I when I was always looking for chamber ensembles and stuff, and I was doing my undergrad at CIM and trying to put a quartet together, and it never really kind of took off. My teacher was really like, look, you need to work on your own solo playing, and that's going to be the most important thing. And like, you'll have the rest of your life for chamber music, but while you're here studying with me, just like, I want you working on your solo playing and getting that as good as you can. And I really I'm grateful for that. At the time I was like, okay, cool, I'll keep at it. But like, I'm like itching, I was like raring to go, just wanting to play quartets and stuff. And at that time the Cavani Quartet was at the Cleveland Institute of Music, and they were doing all this stuff, so I was really like wanting to be involved in their intensive quartet seminar and all that sort of stuff. But after that I went to Juilliard for my master's, and I was trying to put together a group there, and it was a challenging kind of situation there, because there were just a lot of people who were interested in like a lot of different kinds of stuff, and chamber music was not really so much a focus at that time there for so many of the students. But I had a couple of groups that I tried to put together and try to make things happen. And then finally, in the summers, I started going to Kneisel Hall, and totally had a wonderful experience there, and went there twice by myself and one time with the piano trio that I ended up forming. A cellist friend of mine and I got put in a group playing Mendelssohn C minor piano trio. Yeah. And that's Gwen Krosnick, who's now the cellist of the Cassatt Quartet. But so we were like, okay, well, this is fun. And then the faculty put us together for the second session in the Dvorak Piano Quintet. And we're like, well, this is great. And then she was going to be finishing up at Oberlin and coming to New York. And she was like, well, let's put a quartet together. And I was like, that sounds great. Like, let's like, and I was really like, I want a quartet. I want to be doing this all the time. And I think she was a little bit more like, let's just like do this and it'll be fun. And like, we'll just see, we'll see if anything happens. Yeah. Yeah. And then like in that weird interim period, I was like, I would really want to audition for some quartets. And so there were a couple of things that came up that didn't feel quite like the right fit to me. And in the second year of teaching at Gettysburg, I came back and I was directing the orchestra, which was interesting to be conducting. And in February of 2020, right before the flourishing of the pandemic in this country, Carlos reached out to me, the second violinist of the Dali Quartet. And he sent me an email, and he was like, I got your name from the cello professor at Gettysburg. And I don't know if this is something you'd be interested in, but we're looking for a new first violinist. Would you want to audition? And I was like, that sounds great. So I just set up this really ambitious recital program for myself, I think on April 25th at Gettysburg. And it was going to be, earlier in the year, I played Bach B minor and E major partitas alongside solo works by Donald Martino and Richard Wernick. So it was a big all solo violin private program that I got to do at UNC Chapel Hill, which is great. So I was looking forward to that. And then like 4 days later on April 29th, I was going to have my audition with the quartet. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, don't know how I'm going to do all this stuff. But then
what did they have you play? What did they have you play?
So I was preparing movements from stuff. There's a piece called Suite Latina by Juan Ramirez, first movement of Ginastera 1. The Turina Bullfighter's Prayer, or what else was Mendelssohn Opus 80, the slow movement, as well. A couple of arrangements by a really wonderful Puerto Rican arranger named Nicky Aponte, El Dia Que Me Quieras, The Day That You Love Me. He arranged for string quartet. So that was on the list, and then some other stuff too. So it was cool because it was like, except for the Mendelssohn, everything was
Latin music. Yeah.
Latin music, yeah. And like in the quartet auditions that I'd taken before, it was always like dead white guys, or maybe like living white guys. But like, it was all.
I get it. I took it. So how did you learn to speak Spanish so well? Where did that happen? I
started studying Spanish when I was in kindergarten at Breck. And now that I've joined my quartet, I've been thinking about it. And since two of the members of my quartet are from Venezuela and one grew up in Puerto Rico, they speak English like better than I speak Spanish by far. But they've had to go through this whole process of like existing in a place where their first language was not the language that they're going to use. And I just thought that it would be really good for me, for all of us to like know what that's like. And so I do my best. Like when we're in rehearsals, most of the time they're speaking in English because I'm not quite fast enough for the rapid fire Puerto Rican or Venezuelan accents. But I'm getting better. But like they'll speak to me in English. And I'll do my best to respond in Spanish because I think that's because I love it, and I also think it's really important to like just to know what that's like to try to exist in a language that's not your own. Because growing up in the United States, at least for me, like growing up in Minneapolis, like and like anywhere in the United States, you don't have to know any other language. It's not like Europe when like in Switzerland, like the kids grow up speaking French, Italian, and German because depending on which part of Switzerland you are,
which way you
and
go,
they also learn English. It's so great.
It's so nice to meet you. I met you as a young man, and you have grown up into a fantastic, fine adult. And congratulations on your family. I think that's one of the most beautiful things you've got going. And good luck with your premiere. Even send a recording if you can. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Absolutely. We'll do. Yeah. It's really great to connect with you. Thanks, Ray. It's great to spend the time. I appreciate it.
Likewise. Stay well. Do good works like you've been doing.
Thanks. You too.